Greeks believed that in the beginning was the chaos. And that in this chaos, there was this series of really perverted events where these gods came together, had sexual affairs together, and through their sexuality, everything came to be that is. Really sick and twisted idea of how things began. But to the Jew and to the Christian, however, the beginning has quite a different story. And we'll look at that beginning a little bit further next week. And we'll explore that through Genesis. But as a preface to the Gospel of John, I wanted to bring some clarifications, explain to the hearer and the reader that this Gospel has a beginning also. It starts off with, in the beginning was the Word. And this beginning is that first John was a disciple of Jesus Christ. Disciple comes from the Greek word mathetai, which means disciple or pupil or follower. The 1828 Webster's Dictionary defines disciples as a learner, a scholar, one who receives or professes to receive instruction from another, a follower, and adherent to doctrines of another. Webster goes as far to tell us that hence the constant attendants of Christ were called his disciples. And hence all Christians are called disciples, as they profess to learn and receive his doctrines and precepts. Thus, if we are his attendants, if we are following Christ, then we are all his disciples. And it should become our ever-increasing desire to get to know Jesus, to know and understand who he is, and to live with him and according to him. So, as I was saying, John was a disciple of Jesus Christ. He lived 3 some odd years with Jesus and with 11 other people that he called disciples that would follow him, and that Jesus would teach them according to his ways, according to the heart of God. And what would happen is, years later, after this interaction between John and the disciples and Jesus, Jesus would be crucified, and after his death, burial, and resurrection, those known as the 12 minus Judas, who hanged himself for betraying Jesus, were now called apostles, which means called out, or sent out, I mean. So the apostles, the sent out ones, were now sent out into all the world to preach the gospel and to plant churches, and to make sure that people knew that there is a God, and that there is a way to know him, and that if we neglect that knowledge of him, then there would be consequences that follow. So later, John would become an apostle, and as an apostle, he'd become the pastor, or one of the pastors, of the Church of Ephesus. As I prefaced this meeting earlier, the church wasn't denominations, but people were sent out, they preached the gospel, and then churches were planted around regions. So you had the Church of Ephesus. It was the Church of Ephesus. There may have been multiple meeting places where the Church of Ephesus met, but it was still the Church of Ephesus because they were the same body. They were members of the same body. They had differences of opinion, but they weren't divided. They were one. So you would have multiple pastors over multiple portions of the church, but it was still the church. However, John was one of the pastors of the Church of Ephesus, And as tradition tells us, and provided a written instruction for his church, as well as those who would later receive by reading or hearing these instructions. For the sake of the purpose of being born again by the Holy Spirit, Ephesus was known. It was in a place known as Asia Minor, and was deeply submerged into Greek culture. So when John had to enter Ephesus to be a pastor, and then end up writing this gospel in 3 letters, and then later the book of Revelation, there was a purpose behind it. There was a purpose intended, even in the way that he wrote. So when we read, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, then there's a reason why he said that. One reason would be that the Greeks and their idea of the beginning, as I had mentioned already, they believed that in the beginning was the cosmos. And that in the cosmos, or in the chaos would create the cosmos through weird sexual orientations. And then at the same time, there were the Jews that would know in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So, as this Greek culture is surrounded in Ephesus, and the Jewish culture is surrounded in Ephesus, there had to be a mixture there. John had to be able to reach both people at one time and be able to reach them both equally. So the Holy Spirit so chose to speak into John's life as he wrote this gospel, so that people that received it would be able to understand it well. But the depth of the Greek culture, more than 450 years before Jesus enters the scene, Israel was a prominent kingdom. That they they were becoming a powerful nation. That starting from David, God was establishing a kingdom and a royal priesthood, and establishing something that later on Jesus would come through. However, it was a powerful kingdom until people started to turn away from the Lord. And as Israelites began to turn away from the Lord punished them, or not punished them, but disciplined them, so that they would return their hearts back to Him. And by doing that, He would have Babylon come in and take them, bring them into captivity. And then over the course of the next 4 dynasties, Babylon would rule them, and then Medo-Persia would come in and rule them, and then eventually Greece would come and annihilate them, and then Rome would come and annihilate them. This is all according to Daniel chapter 2, and so that we can actually look at what this looked like, go to Daniel chapter 2 and we'll read the first 43 verses. Daniel's right after Ezekiel. So it goes Ecclesiastes, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and then Daniel. And we're in chapter 2, verses 1 through 43. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and a sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. So the king has this dream. He's really freaked out about it. And so he wants these enchanters to come and tell them not just what the dream means, but actually what the dream is, because he wants to know, well, for one, he hired these guys to give him good news, even if it was a lie. So in order to make sure that these guys weren't just fooling with the king, he wanted them to actually tell him the dream and then interpret it for them. But, this was impossible. Verse 8, the king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we have asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to them, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known the king to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel